Welcome to Shahnameh, Book of Kings. Today we continue with the Reign of Sekandar. When Sekandar left the wise queen, Qaydafeh, his grateful heart seemed huge as a mountain, his brow was cleared of furrows, and he had no intention of going back on his promise. At dawn, the next morning, he went to her again when she was seated on an ivory throne with her commandos ranged about her. On the front of the throne was a design in gold, precious black and white Yamani stones, surrounded by jewels, and before her there was a bunch of musk-scented roses. Her son, Taynush, the breaker of horses, and Qaydafeh stood in front of her, listening to her words. Her younger son said to his mother, "Just and fortunate queen, see that Bitqun leaves you well satisfied and with a guide to ensure that no one troubles him along the way. To give him thanks for saving my life. I think of him as my own soul." His mother said, "I will see that his honors are augmented." Then she turned to Sekandar and said, "Tell me what is hidden. What is it you desire, and what has Sekandar said? What message have you brought us from him?" Sekandar replied, "Noble queen, my stay with you has been lengthy. Sekandar told me to ask you for tribute, and said that if I delayed my return, he would lead his army here and destroy this country together with its crown, its throne, its sovereign, its wealth, and its good fortune." When Taynush heard Sekandar's words, he started up like a gust of wind and burst out, "You fool! You nobody, whom no one who has any sense considers human. Who are you? And don't you realize where it is you're sitting? Stand and hide your hands. Don't you know what's fitting before a queen? Your stubborn head is full of harebrained speeches. You're contemptible. Who is this king of yours? And if you don't bow respectfully before our sovereign now, I'll lop off your head here as easily as I might pick an orange from a tree. Before our armies, I'll display your head, and 4 will be avenged when you are dead." Seeing his bellicose rage, his mother shouted, "These are not his words. His friend sent him to our court and speaks as his representative." And she ordered that Taynush be taken out of the court. Then she turned to Sekandar and said to him privately, "This ignorant devil's spawn must not be allowed to think up some plot against you in secret. You're a wise and understanding man. What do you think should be done with him?" Sekandar answered, "This is not how he should be treated. It would be right to call him back." The queen recalled her son and motioned him to the throne again, and Sekandar addressed him, "My lord, if you would accomplish your desires, you should act more calmly. I accept whatever you say, and I feel no resentment against you. My unfortunate position here is because of Sekandar, who rejoices in his throne and crown. It was he who sent me here to ask for tribute from Queen Qaydafeh, so that I could bear whatever unfortunate consequences there might be. I will soon give him his answer, and I suggest a plan that should have resplendent consequences. If I take his hand in mine and bring him to where you're sitting in such a way that you'll see no army with him, and no sword or crown or throne either, what will you give me from your kingdom, if indeed you think well of my friendly offer?" Taynush responded, "These words of yours should be acted on now. If you're being truthful and can do what you've described, I shall give you treasure and money, horses and faithful retainers, whatever you wish. I shall always be grateful to you, and will make you a great lord. You'll be my counselor and treasurer here in this country." Sekandar stood up and took Taynush's hand in his to seal the pact. Taynush asked, "But how can you manage this? What magic are you going to use?" Excuse me. Sekandar said, "When I leave this court, you must accompany me together with 1,000 cavalry worth of warfare. I saw a wooded area on the way here, and I'll hide you and your army there, and you can await in ambush. I'll go ahead and sound out Sekandar's malevolent soul, and I'll say to him, Qaydafeh has sent you so much tribute that you'll never want for wealth again. But their envoy says he's afraid to meet you while you're surrounded by your army. If you and your advisors will come to see Taynush, you will be able to receive this wonderful treasures he has brought. He'll come forward if he sees you without your army. But if he decides to go back, the road is open and we can't stop him. When he hears these flattering words of mine, it won't cross his mind that I'm deceiving him. He'll come into the shade beneath the trees, asking his treasure to bring along wine and his crown and throne. Then you will surround him with your troops, and his days will be at an end. My vengeance and your heart's desire will be accomplished together. An enormous amount of wealth will come into your hands, as well as slaves and caparisoned horses, and from then no one will seek to disturb your peace. Taynush was overjoyed when he heard all this, and lifted up his head like a noble cypress tree. He said, "My hope is that this day will darken while mine grows bright. He will fall suddenly into my trap and pay for the blood he has spilt in the world. The blood of Dara, and of Sindh's nobility, and of brave For, the king of India." When Qaydafeh heard Sekandar's words, she saw well enough what his plan was. She smiled secretly, hiding her coral lips beneath her muslin veil. As Sekandar left her presence, his darkened soul was filled with anxiety. All the long night he sought for some solution. When the sun showed the fringe of its Chinese royal robe, raising its golden banner above the mountains, and the purple silken banner of night dipped in submission, Sekandar made his way to the queen. A servant stood to greet him, and the world conqueror dismounted, as was customary, and walked into her presence. He was ushered forward, and the queen cleared the court of strangers. Seeing Qaydafeh on her throne, Sekandar said, "May the planet Jupiter accompany your deliberations. I swear by the Messiah's faith, by his just commands, by God who is a witness to my tongue, by our rights and by our great cross, by the head and soul of your majesty, by our vestments of clergy and the Holy Ghost, that the soil of Andalusia will never see me again, that I shall send no armies here, that I shall not seek to deceive you, that I shall do no harm to your loved son, neither through my commands or by my own hand. I shall remember in my soul how you kept faith with me, and I shall not seek your harm in any way. Anyone who wishes you well is my brother, and your court is as sacred as the cross to me." Qaydafeh considered his oath, his sincere heart, and his promise. She had golden thrones placed throughout her audience hall, and the front of the hall was hung with splendid Chinese cloths. She summoned her chieftains and assigned them thrones, and then had her 2 noble sons, as well as her extended family and her allies, call in. She said, "In this fleeting world, it is right to avoid sorrow when we can, and I have no desire that the turning heaven should send me vengeance and warfare as my fate. Sekandar's longing for wealth will never be sated, not if he brings the heavens down to the earth. For the sake of wealth he is seeking to harm us, but all the wealth in the world is not worth such pain and sorrow. I have no wish to make war on him, or to bring hardship on this realm. I shall send him a letter full of good advice. I will honor him and offer him good counsel. If then he still looks for war, he will find my advice will be followed by his defeat and imprisonment. If I lead my armies against him, the heavens and the moon will pity his plight. There is no harm in trying this, and it may be that we may remain friends. What do you say to my proposal? Answer me and give me your advice." The council raised their heads and spoke in response. They said, "O just and righteous queen, whose like no one can remember having seen before, you say only what is best, and the land over which you rule is indeed fortunate. If this king does become your friend, this is an outcome that all good men would desire. Your wealth will be substantially diminished, and no health is worth your distress. If a man like Sekandar, who comes from Greece and turns countries into seas of blood with his sword, can be turned back from your door with a few gifts, we say that all the wealth in the world is not worth 1 coin if this can be achieved. We, too, desire only peace between you and a man who seeks war and unworthy of respect." Hearing her wise counselor's words, she had her treasury opened and her father's throne, together with his golden armbands and torques, brought out. There was also a crown inlaid with jewels, so splendid that not one person in that country could put a value on it. She said to Sekandar's supposed envoy, "The crown is priceless, and it would be wrong for anyone else but your king to have it. Since I see that he is worthy of such a crown, I choose him to own it rather than my own sons. The throne has been made in 70 sections, and it could be put together only by one man who has taken it apart. So cunningly were the pieces fitted to one another. Its feet were carved like dragons' heads, and no one could compute the value of the jewels with which it was studded. There were 400 rubies and the color of pomegranate seeds, each weighing 2 mescals, and 400 uncut emeralds, the color of green in a rainbow. Besides this, she gave him 400 huge elephant tusks, the skins of 400 Barbary leopards, 1,000 dappled deerskins, colorful, embroidered with various pictures, 100 hunting dogs and cheetahs that could see a gazelle quicker than the arrow flies, 200 water buffalo led by slaves, 400 ebony stools upholstered in silk brocade, and 400 more of aloes wood with gold designs on them. 100 noble and richly caparisoned horses bearing precious goods were led in, besides with which there were 1,000 Indian and Greek swords, to which the queen added suits of armor and 1,200 helmets. Then she said to her treasurer, "This is the greater part of what I wish to give. Count it out to Bitqun, and tell him that he must be ready to leave at dawn." Dawn lifted its banner and turned the purple sky as white as camphor. The earth was renewed. The mountain glowed red as juniper dye, and from the royal court the din of drums rang out. Sekandar mounted his horse, ready for the departure. Qaydafeh had commanded Taynush to prepare his escort of warriors, and made his way to the queen's palace. Those who were to leave bade her farewell, saying, "May your soul and the heavens be as the warp and the weft of one cloth." They traveled stage by stage until they had almost reached the Greek camp. Sekandar made a stop at the place in the woods that he had mentioned, where there was a flowing stream. He said to Taynush, "Rest here, and refresh yourselves with wine. I shall go and do as I promised. I'll keep my word in every way." Sekandar traveled on with his men until they reached his army. A great shout of joy went up when he rejoined his troops, since they had despaired of ever seeing his face again. They prepared him a royal throne, congratulating him and bowing their heads down to the ground in homage. Sekandar selected 1,000 armored soldiers bearing ox-headed maces, and in a battle order the men surrounded the woods where Taynush and his companions were. And then Sekandar cried out, "My headstrong lord, consider now and say whether you want to fight or run away." Taynush trembled in his encampment and regretted his former plans. He said, "Great king, choose kindness over contempt. Act toward me as you did toward my brother Qaydafeh. Be magnanimous and just to me. This is not what you promised my mother. Didn't you tell her you wouldn't go back on your word?" And Sekandar replied to him, "What's made you turn so weak? And why are you afraid? Your heart should have no fear. You're safe with me, as are all the members in your family. I shall not break my word to Qaydafeh. My promise will be kept in every way. There is no good in lying kings who make fair promises, then they proceed to break." Taynush quickly dismounted, kissed the ground, and began to weep. The king took his hand in his, just as he had done when they sealed their pact, and said, "Calm yourself and think no more of this. I bear no grudge against you in my heart. Before your mother on the throne, I put my hand in yours and said that in just such a fashion I would place the hand of the king of the world in yours. Now I fulfill my promise, since it is not right for kings to utter empty words. I am Sekandar, and I was Sekandar then, when I spun such tales at your court. Qaydafeh knew on that day that the hand in yours was a king's." Then he said to the servant, "Place a throne beneath the blossoming tree." He commanded that a meal, music, and wine be provided, and he gave Greek, Chinese, and Persian robes of honor to Taynush. He gave the prince's companions gold and silver to those of appropriate rank. He gave crowns and belts. Then he said to Taynush, "You should not stay here. This wood is far from your homeland. Say to Qaydafeh from me, wise, fair-sighted, and accomplished queen, while I live, I shall keep faith with you, and my soul is filled with kindness towards you." Sekandar led his army quickly from that place to the land of the Brahmins, as he wished to learn where the ascetics who lived there of the land's ancient practices. When the Brahmins heard that the king was approaching with his army, these God-fearing men made their way down the mountains and gathered together. They wrote a letter to Sekandar, which began by invoking God's blessings on him and wishing him victory and increasing knowledge and power. It continued, "O warlike king, God has given you the great world. So why do you come to this worthless land, the dwelling place of those who live in worship? If you have come here looking for wealth, you must be sorely lacking in wisdom. We have only patience and knowledge, and this knowledge fills our souls with contentment. Patience cannot be taken from us, and knowledge never harms anyone. You will see nothing in this place but a troop of naked ascetics living scattered here and there in the wind and the snow, and if you stay here for long, you will have to live off the seeds of herbs." A messenger, clothed only in a covering of roots and vegetation about his loins, came to Sekandar, who read their letter and decided to treat the man kindly and well. He left the army where they had halted, while he himself went forward with his Greek philosophers. The ascetics heard of the king's approach, and one by one they traveled to greet him. Since they possessed no wealth and had no produce or harvest grain to offer, they brought him small, valueless things. One by one they greeted the magnanimous lord of the earth. Sekandar saw their faces, heard their chants, and saw them running with naked feet, bodies, and heads. He saw that their bodies were unprovided for, but their souls were filled with the fruits of knowledge. Their clothes were of leaves, their diet of seeds. They lived withdrawn from all fighting and warfare, and their food, sleep, and repose were in the plains and the mountains. He questioned them about their food and repose and their peace in the midst of war. One replied, "We have small need of clothes, carpets, and food, because a man is born naked from his mother and returns naked to the earth. It is wrong for him to fuss about what he should wear. Every place is a place of fear, despair, and terror. The earth is our mattress, the sky our covering, and we watch the road for death to come. An ambitious man struggles to gain something that is not worth the effort he has put forth, and then he passes from the world, while his gold and treasures and crown remain here. Only his good deeds will accompany him, and his head and glory will both return to dust." Sekandar questioned him, "Who is the king of our souls, who always accompanies us towards evil?" The ascetic answered, "Greed is the king, the ground of vengeance and the place of sin." Sekandar asked, "What is the reality of this that makes us weep with longing?" The sage replied, "Greed and need are two demons, wretched and malevolent. One is dry-lipped from longing, the other passes sleepless nights from excess. Time passing hunts both down, and blessed is the man whose mind accepts wisdom." When Sekandar heard these words, his face turned pale as fenugreek, his cheeks became sallow, his eyes filled with tears, and furrows filled his once smiling face. The great king asked, "What do you need that I can provide? I will not hesitate to give you my wealth or to undergo suffering for you." The ascetics answered, "Great king, close the door of death and old age for us." The king answered, "But there is no pleading with death. No matter how one hangs back from his sharp-clawed dragon, even if one is made of iron, one cannot escape him. And no matter how long our youth lasts, we cannot evade old age." The Brahmin said, "Wise and puissant king, since you know that there is no recourse against death, and that there is no disaster worse than old age, why do you long for the world in a way? Why do you breathe in the scent of this poisonous flower so eagerly? All you will receive is suffering, while your enemies will inherit the wealth you acquire. To make oneself suffer for another's profit is the act of an ignorant man or a fool. White hairs are a message from death, and what makes you hope that you can stay in this world?" The wise king replied, Just as by God's will a slave must die, this is my fate too. As the turning heavens direct, neither wise men nor warriors can struggle against fate, and the star of those who have killed fighting against me had declined. They deserved their grief, and to have their blood shed, since an unjust man cannot escape his end. They experienced divine punishment because they had stayed from the way of wisdom. No man can evade the will of God or explain what fate brings. Sekandar offered many gifts to the ascetics, but none of them took anything from him. Greed was not part of their natures. He did no harm in that place and set off towards the west. The army journeyed on stage by stage, exhausted by their travels, but still determined. After he had left the land of Brahmins, Sekandar saw a deep and boundless ocean. On its shores lived men who veiled themselves like women and dressed in colorful, splendid clothes. Their language was not Arabic, Turkish, Chinese, or Persian. Their diet consisted of fish, and their land was cut off from the outside world. Sekandar was astonished to meet such folk, and when he saw the ocean, he invoked the name of God. Just at that moment, a mountain rose up out of the water. It was in two sections and glittered yellow like the sun. Immediately, Sekandar asked for a boat so that he could look at it more closely. But one of his Greek philosophers advised him not to cross the ocean steps. He said Sekandar should send someone of less importance to look at it. 30 Greeks and Persians manned the boat, but the yellow mountain was a huge fish, and as soon as the boat approached it, it dived quickly beneath the surface, dragging the boat with it. Sekandar's army watched in horror and called on God to protect them. The Greek philosopher said, "Knowledge is the best of all things, and a knowledgeable man is greater than all others. If the king had gone into that boat and been destroyed, all his armies would have suffered in their hearts." Sekandar led his army forward and came to another body of water, surrounded by reeds that were like plane trees, more than 50 cubits high, with trunks 40 cubits in circumference. All the houses there were made of wood and reeds, and the ground seemed to give beneath their weight. It was inadvisable to stay there longer, and the water was so brackish that no one drank it. When they left this place, they came to a deep lake. The land there seemed inviting. The soil smelled of musk, and the water was as sweet as honey. They ate and drank and lay down to sleep. But as they did, countless snakes came slithering out of the water, and from the bushes flame-colored scorpions appeared. The world darkened for the sleepers, and many died, both warriors and wise men. Boars attacked them from one side, their tusks glittering like diamonds, and from the other came lions larger than oxen, that the soldiers had not the strength to fight against. The army retreated to the red beads, where they set fire to, and so killed the lions, and made their escape so difficult. From there, Sekandar went to Abyssinia, the land of Habash. The country was crowded with men whose skin was as black as a raven's feather, and their eyes as bright as lamps. They fielded a redoubtable army of tall, naked soldiers, and when they saw Sekandar's army approaching, their war cries ascended to the clouds. The king's eyes darkened when he saw them advancing in their thousands. They killed many men as they attacked, hurling bones instead of lances. Sekandar ordered his men to prepare their weapons for battle. The naked Habash pressed on with their attack, and many were killed by Sekandar's lion-like forces, until those who survived fled from the battlefield. So much blood was spilled that the land from end to end was like the Sea of China, with here and there mounds of the dead piled up. Straw was packed around these heaps of corpses, and Sekandar ordered that they be set to fire. That night a rhinoceros could be heard, and Sekandar donned his armor and helmet. Then the animal came into view, more massive than an elephant, with a dark horn on its head. He killed a number of soldiers, and did not retreat, even though he was attacked repeatedly. Finally, He was killed by the attacker's arrows, and his conqueror of lions lay there like a huge iron mountain. Sekandar left the area in haste, giving thanks to God as he went. And here is where I end my tale for today. But I'll be back tomorrow with more tales, many more tales. Until then, my friends.